My parents left my younger brother a mansion worth $800,000 in New York. They left me a rotting wooden cabin in the middle of Alaska. On the day I found out, my fiancé slammed the door in my face, shouting that I was a pathetic loser who would never amount to anything. I was broken, humiliated, and desperate. But when I finally flew to Alaska and opened that cabin door, I found something worth $50 million. That's how my life turned upside down. I'm James Carter, 29 years old, the oldest son in a family that never saw me as good enough. My younger brother, Michael, was the golden child. People in my family used to say he could charm anyone. My father, Robert, believed Michael had the ambition to carry the Carter name forward. My mother, Susan, was softer, more gentle, but she never challenged my father's decisions. Michael was their pride. I was their afterthought. Sarah Johnson, the woman I thought I was going to marry, didn't hide how she saw me either. We had been engaged for a year, and I believed we were building a life together. The truth is, she was only waiting for me to catch up to my brother's success. When she learned about the will, she didn't just leave. She spat venom into my chest that I'll never forget. And that's where my story begins. The moment I lost everything I thought I had. And the moment I was forced to step into something I never expected. When I was growing up, I always knew I was the background character in my own family. Michael, my younger brother, was the shining star. If he wanted something, my parents found a way to give it to him. If I asked for the same thing, the answer was that it wasn't practical or that I needed to work harder. Our father Robert was a man who believed life was a battlefield. He had this idea that one son had the strength to lead, and the other needed to toughen up. My mother Susan was kind and affectionate when we were alone, but in front of my father, she was quiet, always supporting his choices. Michael played varsity soccer, and my father was at every game yelling from the sidelines, proud as if he had raised a champion. I remember once bringing home a short story I had written in high school. My teacher had called it exceptional. I placed it on the dinner table, waiting for recognition. My father barely glanced at it before turning to Michael to ask about his goals for the next soccer season. That moment stuck with me, the way silence feels louder than words. As an adult, the same dynamic continued. Michael thrived. He became a financial consultant in New York City, driving expensive cars, living in luxury apartments, taking weekend trips to Europe. He always had a new watch or a new suit, and people praised him for his confidence. I worked hard, too, but in jobs that barely covered rent and bills. I tried to be proud of him, but I could never shake the shadow he cast over me. Sarah came into my life 3 years ago, and at first, she felt like a lifeline. She was beautiful, ambitious, and full of energy. She told me she loved how different I was from the men she usually dated. She said I had a soul and a heart, and for a while, I believed her. But as time went on, her words changed. She began comparing me to Michael, asking why I couldn't dress like him, why I couldn't aim higher, why I couldn't fight harder to succeed. At dinners, she would lean across the table and say things like, "James, I just don't understand how you're content with this small life. Don't you want more? Don't you want to be somebody?" I told her I was trying. I told her, not everything can be measured by money or status. She would roll her eyes and say, "Tell that to the landlord when rent is due." Then came the phone call that changed everything. Our family lawyer contacted us about the will. My parents had passed within months of each other. First, my father from a stroke, then my mother after her health declined. I was still reeling from the loss, still trying to process grief. Michael and I were both asked to meet at the office to go over their estate. Walking into that office, I held on to a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had left something meaningful for me. Maybe my mother had fought for me in the end. Michael strolled in like it was a business meeting, shaking hands with the attorney and laughing, as though it was already decided in his favor. When the will was read, it felt like a hammer smashing against my chest. Michael received a mansion in New York valued at over $800,000, along with the majority of their financial assets. I received the deed to a remote cabin in Alaska. That was it. No explanation, no balance. Just Michael with a mansion and me with a forgotten shack in the wilderness. I sat frozen in the chair, my fingers gripping the armrests, my face burning with humiliation. Michael smirked as if life had simply confirmed what he already knew. "Guess Dad always believed in me," he said, patting me on the shoulder like I was a child who needed comfort. When Sarah heard about it later that night, she lost control. She shouted so loudly the neighbors could hear through the walls. "A cabin? Are you kidding me? Michael gets a mansion and you get a shack in the woods? Do you even hear yourself when you talk about your life? You are a pathetic loser, James. You always have been." She threw the engagement ring on the table. I am not wasting my life on someone who will never amount to anything. Then she stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I sat there in silence, staring at the ring. I felt stripped bare. Not only had I lost my parents, but in the same week, I had lost the woman I thought I was going to spend my life with. Every insult from my childhood came back at once, each one echoing in my head. My father's dismissive tone, Michael's smug pride, Sarah's cruel words, it was all a chorus, telling me I was worthless. For days, I carried the deed to that cabin in my pocket. I pulled it out over and over, staring at it like it was a cruel joke. A rotten shack in the middle of nowhere. What was I supposed to do with it? Sell it for scraps, burn it down, pretend it didn't exist? But the more I stared at the faded ink on that paper, the more something shifted inside me. Maybe it wasn't about the property itself. Maybe it was about facing what my parents had left behind. One night, as the city traffic roared outside my window, and my apartment felt like a prison, I made the decision. If this was all I was worth to them, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I bought a one-way ticket to Alaska. That was the moment I stopped running from my family's judgment. That was the moment I decided to face the cabin. The plane to Alaska was small and rattled, as if every gust of wind might pull it apart. I sat pressed against the cold window, staring at endless stretches of snow and forest below. I clutched the deed in my hand like it was both a curse and a key. My mind replayed Michael's smirk and Sarah's final words. Pathetic loser. Those words cut deeper than anything my father had ever said. They were sharp enough to follow me into the silence of the plane cabin. When the plane landed, the air outside hit me like a fist. It was colder than anything I'd ever felt in New York. The ground was blanketed with snow that crunched under my boots, and the sky was an unbroken gray. A driver I had arranged with the small local airline loaded my bag into a battered truck and drove me down icy roads for hours. We passed nothing but forest, frozen rivers, and the occasional old wooden house that looked abandoned. Finally, the driver pulled up to the end of a narrow road and pointed ahead. That's as far as I can take you. The rest is on foot. Cabin should be about a mile that way. I paid him, slung my bag over my shoulder, and started walking. The cold bit into my skin through my gloves. Each step crunched in the snow, and the silence of the woods was heavy. There were no cars, no people, no city noises. Only my own breath and the sound of boots against snow. When I finally saw the cabin, my heart sank. It looked worse than I had imagined. The porch was sagging. One of the windows was broken, and the wood on the outside was blackened and cracked from years of rot. The roof looked like it could cave in at any moment. I laughed once, bitter and short. Because this was exactly the kind of inheritance you would leave to someone you didn't care about. I dropped my bag on the porch and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed as if the house itself was angry about being disturbed. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Broken furniture was scattered across the floor. The smell of mold and old wood stung my nose. I walked through the rooms, each one worse than the last. The kitchen sink had rusted through. The floorboards creaked like they were ready to snap under my weight. A family of mice had chewed through what once might have been a couch. I sat down on a chair that looked sturdy enough, and buried my face in my hands. This is what they thought of me, I said aloud, my voice echoing in the empty cabin. This is all I'm worth. I wanted to call Michael right then, just to hear his voice gloat over the phone. I wanted to shout at him, to ask why our parents thought he deserved everything while I got nothing but a ruin. But I knew what he would say. He would laugh, tell me Dad was right, that I never had the drive, that I was always destined to be the leftover son. The truth hurt worse than the cold outside. That night, I unrolled my sleeping bag in the corner of the least broken room. As I lay there in the dark, I thought about Sarah. Her face, her voice, the way she had once held my hand and told me she believed in me. Then her words from that last night came back, pounding in my head like hammers. Pathetic loser. She had said it with such venom that I could still hear it over the howling wind outside. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the old cabin made me wonder if the roof would collapse over me. Every gust of wind made the broken window rattle like bones. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me and stared at the shadows on the ceiling, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, I woke to silence. The fire I had tried to build in the fireplace had burned out, and the cold had seeped into my bones. I stumbled outside, watching my breath cloud the air, and stared at the trees surrounding me. The cabin was isolated. There were no neighbors, no one who would hear me if I shouted. I had never felt so completely cut off from the world. For a moment, I thought about leaving, selling the land to the first buyer I could find, taking whatever money I could scrape together, and disappearing back into New York. But the image of Michael in his mansion and Sarah laughing at me made me stay rooted where I was. I could not go back to them beaten. That thought burned in me as I walked back inside. I began to explore the cabin more carefully, pushing aside broken chairs and clearing out piles of rotting wood. Anger drove me forward. Every time I lifted a piece of debris, I thought of my father telling me I was weak. Every time I swept dust into a pile, I thought of Michael's smug face. Every time I opened a door, I thought of Sarah's voice cutting me down. As I worked, I told myself, there has to be more to this. There has to be a reason they left this place to me. It was the only way I could make sense of the unfairness. I couldn't accept that the cabin was just trash they wanted off their hands. By evening, my body was sore, but something kept me moving. It wasn't hope. It was desperation. If I didn't find something here, I knew I would leave Alaska shattered and empty. And then, as I pulled a dusty rug away from the floor, I noticed a handle, a small iron ring embedded in a square wooden panel. I crouched down and pulled, and the panel lifted with a groan of wood and rusted hinges. Beneath it, a dark space opened up. A hidden cellar. My heart pounded. For the first time since arriving, I felt a spark of something other than despair. The handle in the floor felt cold against my fingers. My heart was racing faster than it ever had before. I knelt there, breathing hard, staring at the black opening beneath the cabin. The smell rising from it was damp and earthy, like soil that had been sealed away for decades. For a moment, I hesitated, afraid of what I might find. Maybe it was just a storm shelter. Maybe it was nothing. But something inside me pushed me forward. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag, clicked it on, and shined the beam into the hole. Wooden steps led down into darkness. They looked worn, but intact. My stomach tightened as I lowered one foot onto the first step. It groaned under my weight, but it held. Slowly, carefully, I descended, the flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The cellar was colder than the cabin above. My breath fogged in the beam of light. I swept it across the room and froze. Wooden crates stacked along the stone walls. Metal chests, some rusted, some surprisingly well preserved. A large trunk in the corner. Dust covered everything, but the space was organized, deliberate. I crouched in front of one of the crates and pried it open. The wood splintered as I pulled it apart. Inside, rows of cloth bundles were neatly tied with twine. I picked one up, unwrapped it, and nearly dropped it. In my hands lay a stack of gold coins, heavy and gleaming, even through the dust of decades. My chest tightened as I whispered into the dark, "What is this?" I tore open another bundle. Antique jewelry sparkled back at me, rings, brooches, necklaces, each one shining with stones I couldn't name but knew were valuable. My pulse thundered in my ears. I opened another crate and found more of the same. Gold, silver, jewels. It felt like stepping into a dream. I stumbled back against the wall, clutching the flashlight. As the truth sank in, my parents hadn't left me garbage. They had left me something hidden, something enormous. The weight of it nearly crushed me. Not because of its value, but because of what it meant. They had trusted me with this, not Michael, me. For years, I had believed I was the disappointment. I had lived under the shadow of Michael's success and my father's criticism. Now, I was staring at proof that my parents had seen me differently than I thought. They hadn't chosen Michael. They had chosen me. But the realization didn't just bring relief. It brought fear. What was I supposed to do with all of this? Who else knew about it? What if Michael found out? What if Sarah heard and came clawing back into my life? My hands trembled as I set the gold coins back into the crate. This wasn't just wealth. It was responsibility. It was danger. I forced myself to keep exploring. In the large trunk in the corner, I found leather-bound ledgers, brittle with age. Flipping through the pages, I saw detailed accounts of land rights, mining claims, and business dealings, dating back nearly a century. My family's history was written here. They had owned vast tracts of land, and some of the documents suggested rights to resources that could still be active. One name kept appearing, my grandfather, William Carter. I had never known much about him, only that he had been a hard man, stricter even than my father. Now I understood he had been building something that had passed through generations. And here in this hidden cellar, my parents had passed it to me. I sank onto one of the crates. The flashlight balanced on my knee, and tried to breathe. For so long, I had believed the lie that I was worth nothing. Yet here I was, sitting on top of wealth. So immense it was almost impossible to grasp. $50 million or more, hidden away beneath a cabin. Everyone thought was worthless. But this was also the moment of decision. I couldn't just leave the treasure here and pretend it didn't exist. I couldn't run back to New York waving it in Michael's face either. That would invite chaos, lawsuits, maybe even threats. And Sarah, God, she would come back the second she caught wind of it, acting like she had always believed in me. I knew I couldn't let that happen. I made a vow right then, whispering it into the cold air. I won't waste this. I won't let them take it. I'll protect it. I'll prove that you were right to trust me. For the next 2 days, I worked like a man possessed. I cataloged everything in the cellar, writing down what I found in a notebook I had brought. I reinforced the trapdoor with new nails, and covered it again with the rug. I cleared out the cabin, patching the broken window, fixing the fireplace, and sweeping out years of filth. Each improvement, however small, felt like taking back control of my life. As I worked, my mind sharpened. This wasn't just about money. It was about identity. My parents had seen me as someone who could handle the weight of this legacy, even if they never said it aloud. Maybe my father's harshness had been his twisted way of testing me. Maybe my mother's quiet eyes had carried a message she never dared to speak. Standing in the middle of that broken cabin, I no longer felt like a man abandoned. I felt like a man entrusted. The bitterness I had carried for years began to shift. Sarah's words still burned, but now they fueled me instead of breaking me. Michael's smirk still haunted me, but now I wanted him to know that I was more than the shadow he believed I was. When I finally lay down on the patched-up bed that night, the cabin no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a fortress, a beginning. My turning point wasn't just finding the treasure. It was realizing that for the first time in my life, I had power, and I was ready to use it. The days after I discovered the cellar were a blur of work, fear, and determination. I kept cataloging everything I found. Each crate I opened revealed more proof that my parents had hidden something extraordinary. I tried to sleep at night, but my mind spun with possibilities. I kept asking myself the same question: why me? One evening, as I sat with the ledgers spread out across the cabin floor, I noticed a folded envelope tucked between 2 pages. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. My chest tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, yellowed but carefully preserved. "James," it began. "If you are reading this, it means your father and I are gone. I need you to understand that what we have left for you is not a mistake or a punishment. It is trust. Your father always saw Michael as bold, but he also saw recklessness in him. He saw pride in appearances, not substance. With you, he saw strength that does not show itself in loud victories, but in patience, resilience, and heart. We knew you would protect this legacy, not squander it. Please forgive us for the way it may have seemed. We love you, your mother." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. For years, I had believed my parents thought I was worthless. For years, I had carried their silence as proof that they never believed in me. And now, in my hands, I held proof that I had been wrong. They had believed in me all along. They just had a different way of showing it. I pressed the letter to my chest, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Every insult Michael had thrown, every time my father dismissed me, every cruel word Sarah had screamed. It all collapsed under the weight of this one truth. I was the one they had chosen, not Michael, not the golden boy, me. But that realization also brought the storm to my doorstep. The news of the will had already spread among family friends, and Michael had begun asking questions. He called me one night, his voice sharp. "So, how's life in your little shack? Have you realized yet that Mom and Dad left you a pile of garbage while I'm living in their mansion? Sell it and stop embarrassing yourself, James. Everyone knows you can't handle anything better." I wanted to tell him the truth, to shout into the phone that the cabin was worth more than everything he had combined, but I held my tongue. "I'm managing," I said instead. My voice was steady, but inside, fire roared. Michael thought he had won, and part of me wanted him to keep thinking that. Sarah, too, came sniffing around. She sent me a message weeks after leaving. "James, I've been thinking. I overreacted. I miss you. Maybe we could talk about things again." I stared at the screen, the memory of her voice calling me pathetic echoing in my mind. For a moment, I considered responding, but then I deleted the message without a word. She hadn't missed me. She had heard whispers about money, and that was the only reason she reached out. I turned back to the cellar. I pulled out more documents, and realized the scale of what I had inherited. My grandfather had staked claims in Alaska's land during the early days of resource exploration. Rights to timber, mineral deposits, and even oil were still active. The gold and jewels alone were worth tens of millions, but the land rights made it potentially far more. It hit me then. My parents hadn't just left me wealth. They had left me a future. A way to rise, not through someone else's approval, but through my own decisions. This was more than an inheritance. It was a second chance. That night, I built a fire in the cabin, and sat in front of it with the letter from my mother resting on my lap. The flames crackled, and the shadows danced across the walls. I spoke out loud as if my parents were in the room. "I'll protect this. I'll make it grow. You trusted me, and I won't fail you." For the first time in years, I felt whole. The cabin was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was proof of trust, responsibility, and purpose. The bitterness that had poisoned me began to fade. I wasn't living for Michael's approval. I wasn't bending to Sarah's insults. I wasn't drowning under my father's shadow. I was standing on my own ground, holding my own legacy. The climax of my story wasn't just the discovery of wealth beneath the floorboards. It was the moment I realized I had finally broken free from the chains of doubt and humiliation. The world could call me whatever it wanted, but I knew who I was. My parents knew who I was. As the fire burned low and the night grew quiet, I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the ledger. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a loser. I felt chosen. The morning after I found my mother's letter, I stepped outside into the freezing Alaskan air, and felt something inside me settle for the first time in years. The cabin that had once seemed like a punishment now felt like a responsibility. I looked out at the endless forest, the snow hanging heavy on the branches, the silence pressing against my ears, and I thought, this is mine. Not just the cabin, not just the gold, or the land rights buried in the cellar. The choice to do something meaningful with my life was mine. In the days that followed, I began repairing the cabin with new determination. I patched walls, fixed the roof, and cleared out broken furniture. Every swing of the hammer felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My father had always said I lacked drive. Michael had mocked me as weak. Sarah had called me pathetic. Each insult fueled me as I worked. With every repair, I proved them wrong. The cabin was no longer a symbol of failure. It was becoming a home. I spent my evenings in the cellar, reading through the ledgers, trying to understand the full scope of what I had inherited. The numbers, the maps, the deeds. They painted a picture of a family history I had never been told. My grandfather, William, had built something powerful, and my parents had chosen me to continue it. They hadn't spoken the words, but their actions had been louder than anything they ever said. That realization changed me. Michael continued to call, leaving messages dripping with arrogance. "Enjoy your shack, James. I'll be in Italy next month. Maybe I'll send you a postcard from my balcony." Each message only reminded me of the difference between us. He believed success was measured by luxury. I now knew it was measured by responsibility. I didn't return his calls. I didn't need to. Sarah tried again, too. She sent another message saying she missed me and wanted to see me. This time she added, "I don't care about what your parents left. I just want you back." But I knew her words were empty. If I had truly been worthless to her, she would never have come back at all. She had smelled money in the air, and that was the only reason she reached out. I deleted her message without hesitation. For the first time, I felt strong enough to walk away without regret. I began reaching out quietly to experts, lawyers, and historians who could help me validate the land rights and the value of the artifacts in the cellar. I did it under a false name at first, careful not to attract attention. The responses confirmed what I already suspected. The collection was worth far more than I had guessed. The mining rights alone could change everything. The wealth was real, but so was the responsibility. If I mishandled it, I could lose it all. If I treated it wisely, I could build something lasting. And that was when I realized the true lesson. My parents had not chosen me because I was stronger or smarter than Michael. They had chosen me because they knew I would not waste it. They knew I would carry the weight with care. Michael had been given something he could show off. Something he could flaunt to the world. I had been given something hidden, something sacred, something that required patience and humility. One night, sitting by the fire, I read my mother's letter again. Her words echoed in my head. "We knew you would protect this legacy, not squander it." For years, I had wanted to hear my parents say they were proud of me. I thought I needed their approval spoken aloud. Now, I realized they had told me in the only way they knew how. They had entrusted me with everything. That was pride in its purest form. The man who had walked into that cabin was broken, humiliated, and desperate. The man sitting there now was different. I wasn't Michael's shadow anymore. I wasn't Sarah's failed fiancé. I wasn't the disappointment my father had labeled me. I was the heir to something far greater than money. I was the heir to trust. When I finally decided to leave the cabin for a short time and return to New York, I carried myself differently. I didn't need to tell Michael what I had found. I didn't need to flaunt it. I let him believe whatever he wanted. Because the truth was mine alone. As I boarded the plane, I thought about how quickly Sarah would come back, begging if she knew the truth. And I smiled to myself. She would never hear it from me. In the end, the cabin had been more than an inheritance. It was a test, and it was a gift. It broke me down to my lowest point, and forced me to rebuild not only the cabin itself, but my identity. The gold, the jewels, the land rights, they were valuable. But the most valuable thing I discovered in Alaska was the truth about myself. If there is one lesson I want anyone listening to this story to take away, it is this. Sometimes what looks like rejection is actually trust in disguise. Sometimes the broken, forgotten places in your life are the ones hiding the greatest treasures. My parents did not abandon me. They gave me a chance to rise. And when I look back at the man I was before I stepped onto that plane to Alaska, I understand something Sarah once said. She had called me a pathetic loser. Back then, maybe I was. But standing here now, I can tell you with certainty, I am not anymore. So, I'll ask you this. If you were handed a broken cabin, and inside it you found a fortune, what would you do? Would you sell it and chase the world's approval? Or would you protect it and honor the trust placed in you? That cabin in Alaska changed my life. What I thought was the cruelest inheritance became the greatest gift I could have imagined. My parents didn't leave me behind. They trusted me with something greater than money, something that forced me to grow into the man I was meant to be. I went there broken, humiliated, and angry. I left knowing I was chosen, knowing I had worth that no insult could take away. If my story spoke to you, if it made you think about your own life, and the hidden gifts inside your struggles, then do me a favor. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know in the comments what you would have done. If you were in my shoes, would you have sold the fortune and walked away? Or would you have protected it the way my parents wanted me to? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Every story I share is meant to remind you that even in the darkest places, there's always something worth finding.